understand, we got faith, seeking wisdom.
For example,
faith,
you like chicken wings, I know, right?
Why don't you come
very much so.
Faith, seeking understand, we got faith, seeking wisdom.
That God is God's being fully active.
Come get some.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the class. Lesson 4 on St. Thomas Aquinas. Hope you're doing well out there in the real world. Hope you can hear me. We had a little bit of homework from Lesson 3, and it's all right if you don't remember. The job was for us to check out this video that I'm going to drop back in the comment thread here for you to check out if you haven't already. And it's a great video produced by BBC that gets us at the question of suffering and the basic question of theodicy, which is the thing that we've been engaging kind of sideways as we go through all of the saints. So it's the question of how could a good God make a world which contains suffering? And we'll engage that some later as well with Professor Tony Baker, who I'm excited to bring to y'all today for today's lesson. But yeah, the video is about the free will defense, and I think it does a really good job through the illustration of kind of simplifying things and showing kind of the classic understanding of evil and how God could relate to an evil world. And so check out that video. It'll help you. I think it really does a good job of showing the limits of the free will defense. And basically all of it is to say, you know, God gave us freedom so that we could do good or bad and choose God instead of making us robots that would follow God automatically because we're programmed to do good, if you will. Instead of that, giving us freedom. And so we have the choice to choose the good or the evil. And the limitations of that, of course, are there's such kind of extreme evil and examples through human history that you wonder about the ability to be given the choice to do extreme evil. And then you also, the challenge is, how does it explain what the video calls natural evil, which are things like disease, which we know very much about right now, and things like hurricanes, which we also know about, and things like, you know, volcanoes erupting and all those kind of things. And there's a question of whether we should call that evil or not, but the question of the creator creating those things as well. So it's a good video that breaks down the problem for us pretty well. Before we get started today, I am thinking about all of the things that are happening in our world right now, and I'm thinking about, in particular, close to us, we've got Hurricane Sally, which I believe is impacting the Alabama and maybe a little bit of the Florida Gulf Coast this morning. So want to pray for those folks down there. And of course, we've got all the fires happening out west. Just want to acknowledge and pray for all of those families and people who are suffering out there, whose suffering is real and not just a problem to be solved intellectually. And just a reminder that the reason that we're doing this work is so that our faith may be increased. And, you know, we start with faith. We start with the belief that God loves us and cares for us. And then we're kind of working through how to make sense of that all. And so this morning I wanted to start with a prayer from the New Zealand prayer book, which I know a lot of Episcopalians enjoy. And so this is for a prayer for a Wednesday morning. That's today, Wednesday morning. The Lord be with you. Holy and ever-living God, by your power we are created, and by your love we are redeemed. Guide and strengthen us by your Spirit, that we may give ourselves to your service and live each day in love to one another and to you. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. All right, thanks for that. And prayers for those who are facing the natural world today, right? So let's get going here. We're going to go with St. Thomas Aquinas. I am excited to bring an interview with Dr. Anthony Baker, aka Tony, which we'll play at the end of this lesson. I had a lot of fun talking to Tony. I hope that you enjoy our conversation on St. Thomas. And we're going to dive in real quick, get to this presentation here. Let me make sure that all of this is working correctly and get me in there too. All right, so faith-seeking understanding, we're journeying from the heart to the head, starting with faith and trying to make sense out of it. And so here we go. Today we're talking about a period known as scholasticism. So if you think about the development of universities and the system of universities throughout Europe and really throughout the Middle East as well, by this time, close to the Middle Ages, there in the 13th century, they're kind of established, and you've also got many orders of monastics who are established as well. And so it's in this period of scholasticism when things start to get written down, and well, they've been written down, but written down in a very logical and academic way, and kind of the world of academia is really taking shape from this time forward. And in that, you've got this wonderful, brilliant mind of a man who must have been just super interesting to observe in his day. One of the things that he says is that he's blessed because he's understood every page that he's read. And so that kind of mind that we find throughout human history, these minds that are given to their various disciplines, whether it be math, philosophy, and in this case, theology. We're lucky to have minds like that of Aquinas, that of Thomas. And so, yeah, let's dive deep into what Aquinas can offer us. We're going to talk about creation. We're going to talk about suffering. These are things we've encountered in the past lessons as well, sin and redemption. And so just to let you know a little bit about Thomas, born in 1225, was born in Italy. Tomas de Aquino, I believe. I'm probably butchering the Italian there. But he was born in Italy in a town called Aquino. That's why we call him Aquinas. And you'll hear more about that in my discussion with Tony. He was a Dominican monk from the order of Dominicans. And so he led a life of monastic practice. Last week we talked about how Christianity plus Plato equals Augustine, and this week we're taking the same simplified formula. Of course, there's much more to it than this simple formula, but simply speaking, you could take Christianity and the philosophy of Aristotle, and you would get Aquinas. And then a beautiful mind. And just by way of another story, there's a story that I read about where Thomas is been asked to the court of a king, and he's having dinner in the court with the king and the court there, and he's thinking to himself, and he's thinking about the Manichaean controversy, which was the heretical movement that for a time Augustine was a part of, and he's thinking about how to logically, theologically defeat them. And then just kind of thinking to himself out of nowhere, he says, well, that settles it for the Manichees. And everybody stops and looks at him and says, what in the world is going on here? And then he starts dictating, which he did, to his scribes. He starts telling them the theology that he's worked out. And then he has to apologize to the king because he says he thought he was at his desk. So, that kind of mind that's so absorbed in thinking that can barely recognize the things that are going on around him. So that's the kind of guy that Thomas was. All right, so his major works, the one that we study and engage most in Christian theology is called Summa Theologica. It is a monster work, just immense work of systematic theology, and I want to get into it a little bit more. We're going to actually go to the Summa often today. And then Summa contra Gentiles, probably Gentiles, maybe. I don't know. I should know, but I don't. But basically a defense or an apologetic work um, from other secular or religious sources in defense of Christianity. And so Summa Theologica, I just want to go over here to this page real quick and let you know that you can today get the entire Summa online for you for free at this page called newadvent.org, a Catholic resource, thanks to the Catholic Church and those that put this website together. And so it breaks it down and has all the links to each part and each question. You can see that we are in the first part here. And what we're dealing with now is really a systematic theology. And what we mean by that is a very organized, structured way of asking questions and getting answers about God and about how God relates to creation. And so you see, first off, what Thomas wants to do here in the first part, we're talking about the existence of God, and we're talking about the nature of God and God's attributes. So Thomas starts his systematic theology very intentionally with a theology of God, a doctrine of God. And then we keep on moving. We go to the Trinity and then down to creation. And then we're walking through kind of the ranks of creation, the angels, the 6 days and the creation of matter and the creation of animals and day and night and all those things we remember from the 6 days. And then the creation of man, which gets a lot of attention, and then the government of creatures. So that's the entire first section, and you can see how it's just laid out there for you in a very good order, or a very systematized order, to use that word. So yeah, let's go on then, and we're going to come back to that first part in just a second. We're going to talk about creation. So these are the questions that we've been engaging over the past few weeks. How was the world created? What kind of world was created? What's the nature of the world? Is it good or bad? Those sort of questions. And does the world change? Is it static or is it variable? And so we've been talking about that a little bit. And I want to go back to this first part of the Summa. And we're here in the question 45, which deals with creation. And I just want to say that, I wrote these questions very simply, and we've been engaging them for the past 3 weeks now of what kind of creation is it? How was it made? Thomas does this very, very extensively. As you see, this is one question 45, that has 8 parts, 8 articles. And in each question, let's just look at this together. So we're in Article 1, right here. And the question is whether to create is to make something from nothing. Now, you remember from last week we talked about creation ex nihilo, which was creation out of nothing. And so Thomas is taking up this question of how things were created, whether or not they're created out of something. And then you see in the Summa, the way that he builds the argument is that he starts with objections. And the first line of objection 1, it would seem that to create is not to make anything from nothing. All right, so he starts with the objection or the counter position, and he has 3 objections that he lists there. And then he gives us an on the contrary, and then the part that I skipped to, guilty enough, the easy reading and probably the not so appropriate or academically sound reading is to go directly to the I answer that portion, which I do. But I just want to point out that in the way that he structures these questions, a smart thing to do if you're making any argument is to anticipate what objections people are going to have about your argument. And so he does that very extensively. And this is one question, one article of one question that has to do with how things were created. And the Summa is full of this, full of objections, full of I answer that's, and replies to objections. And so it's just immense. Like the extent of the work that Thomas Aquinas did is it's really something to behold. And just want to point out, he says that creation is the mode of emanation of things from the first principle. Now, how theological, academic, scholastic does that sound? The mode of emanation of things from the first principle. And so, you break that down a little bit. Thomas believed that God is the first principle, God is the original cause, the first cause, which brings us back over here so we can check something off here on the board. God is the first cause of all things. This is one of Thomas's famous arguments about creation and how it started. The unmoved mover, God was there originally, and like the Big Bang, there was nothing. Boom, there's something. God causes motion, God causes creation, God causes emanation of God's self into creation. That word emanation, kind of an outpouring of God's being into the being of creation. Cool stuff. But yeah, it sounds super theological and technical at times. The emanation of things from the first principle. And so Thomas believes creation ex nihilo. He's continuing that doctrine of creation. And so, yeah, we go back to the page here, and you can see the other questions that he takes up. Whether God can create anything, and you've got your objections, your I answer that, your reply to objections. Whether creation is anything in the creature, that gets to the nature of what's being created. So this stuff, I just want to point out that you can, if you're looking for these kinds of answers in the way that theologians thought about that, and especially the way that Thomas brings in Greek philosophy to help him answer these questions, it's just all here. I mean, it's all here, and it's all available for you. newadvent.org. And you can look at the Summa Theologica. So I want to go back over here and just say we're going to kind of scan through, and I think that the heart of today's lesson will be my conversation with Tony, because Tony is a systematic theologian, and Tony can put it in good language and help y'all understand these questions a little bit better. I want to point to the source material today for y'all and let you explore a little bit more into these questions, because Thomas answers them extensively. And so in the second part, we talk about how did sin enter the world? What is the nature of sin? How does sin change the world? And if you remember last week, we talked about Augustine. And for Augustine, it's very clear that the original sin happened when Adam sinned and Eve sinned in the garden, and they turned away from God. And from that, suffering and evil enters the world. Kind of a classic understanding of how suffering entered the world through the actions of human beings, or through moral evil, if you will, from the video that we watched. So yeah, and in this part, we go to the second part of the Summa, which is its own book, if you will. And in the second part of the Summa, we're dealing with man's nature, men and women and their nature, who they are, what they're made for, and kind of what happens to them along the way. And so if you look at this, man's last end. So Thomas wants to start, and I'm going to come back over here for a second. Thomas wants to start at the end with us, and wants to tell us that we were created for something. And the way that Tony used to put it in class was, we are natural creatures given supernatural ends, right? So we are formed in a natural way, given creation, but we're made to be more and more like God, and more divine. And so it gets to this word that I've got to share with you. This is a word that we like to say over and over in seminary, and certainly our professors threw at us many times in seminary. But the idea, telos, right? So telos means goal or end. And so in seminary, we used to say, tell us your telos. Hilarious, I know. Right. So end or goal. So what is the goal of human life? What is the goal of each individual human life? What is the goal of collective human life? What is man's natural end? Humankind's natural end. Each human person's natural end. And so for Thomas, hey, it's a good answer. Happiness. Yay. We want to be happy, and it's not happiness in some sort of lower form of just kind of gratification, temporary gratification, or those kind of things, but it's happiness in the sense of fulfillment, and the Greek term eudaimonia, which means just kind of excellence in mind, body, and soul. And so happiness is what we're shooting for, and that's man's natural end. And so Thomas says that this is what God created us for. And you can see in this second part, we get into man's last end. We get into the nature of human action. We get into the passions and what Thomas calls our appetites, the appetite of the will, the appetite of the flesh, all those sort of things. And we get into, the ability for humans to choose good or evil, and the choice that's given to us. And we get into our habits. So this is another place where Thomas shows that he's in tune with Aristotle. Aristotle said we are habitual creatures, and based on how our proclivity toward virtue or vice will head in those directions, if we build up a life of goodness and virtue, then our soul will excel. But if we fall prey to those kind of bodily vices and appetites of the flesh, then we'll get stuck there. And so we tend towards one direction or the other. And Thomas is with Aristotle in this. So you have the habits, the vice and the sin, and then the law. And then, of course, grace, ends it with grace. So I don't want to get too far into that, because that's really the next part that leads us into grace. But but come back over here and go back to our slideshow. The third part really deals with redemption, justification, sanctification, how we are justified before God, given that we sin. Christ is the answer, right? And then sanctification, how we become more and more like God, having been redeemed. All right, so I want to go back, and you'll see that the third part of the Summa deals with this question. And the first thing, as we said last week, the first thing to point to when it comes to our redemption is the incarnation. Let me turn this back on for y'all and get myself back in there. Is the incarnation. So the fact that God cared enough to send God's Son, the second person of the Trinity, we believe by our creeds and by our faith and orthodoxy, the second person of the Trinity came, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. And the incarnation shows the extent of God's love. It shows the fulfillment of the Scriptures, and it shows how exaltation can occur in human life with sacrifice and humility and following the example of Christ. So all of those things the incarnation shows to us. And so you can see Thomas wants to walk us through the incarnation, the person of the second person of the Trinity, assuming the human nature. And so he's talking to us about the relationship between the human and divine natures in Christ. He goes into the life of Christ and walks us through chronologically all the way from conception to ascension. And then we're into the sacraments and baptism and Holy Eucharist, right? And so he wants to tell us about all of the ways that Christ has affected our lives from the incarnation all the way through the resurrection. And so, again, this is a systematic theology, and in each section, I'll just go into one section here on human nature. The mode of union of the part of human nature, whether human nature was more assumable by the Son of God than any other nature, right? And so we are into it. Just every question really gets into these questions about Jesus and how God could be man and man could be God, and working those things out to a great extent. All the way through understanding that, it was necessary, and I think that this boils down to it, and we'll get into it in our discussion with Tony, but Thomas believed that it was necessary and fitting that the way that God would choose to save and redeem bodily creatures was for God to enter into the world in a body, God's self, and offer an example of excellent human life and a man who was working toward the end of fulfillment and happiness and give us that example. It was fitting that God should come among us and do those things. So that's really the story of redemption there. And yeah, so I want to get us to, I see we got, you like Big Bang better. I've seen you be over there. Emanation of the first principle. Yeah, Big Bang sounds a little bit easier to follow, I think. Yeah, so I want to get us to, we're 25 minutes in, get us to the interview with Tony, and then I'll come back and we'll take a couple of questions about Thomas in general or about the interview, and then I'll see you on the other side of that.
Hey everybody, it's the Reverend C.J. Metters here. I am here at the virtual Posse East Bar and Grill. The actual Posse East Bar and Grill is a hangout spot next to the Seminary of the Southwest, where many good conversations about God have been had and many friendships have been formed. And I'm going to have Professor Anthony Baker, Professor of Systematic Theology there at the Seminary of the Southwest, have him join me and talk to me a little bit about Aquinas, or Thomas, as he is known for those who know him on a first-name basis. And so Tony's going to join us in just a second, but I do want to drop a couple of links to Tony's works on Amazon. The first is a book that Tony wrote. It's called Diagonal Advance, Perfection in Christian Theology. We're going to get to some of those themes in our discussion today. And he's just done a work on the theology of Shakespeare, which is fun and interesting stuff. So let's get to the conversation with Tony.
We're taking all that knowledge, but then putting it in conversation with philosophy, putting it in conversation with Islam and Judaism, really digging deep into the sort of the full intellectual tradition, and then sort of setting up these theological questions. So we really look back to Thomas now as, in some ways, a kind of high water mark of that sort of full, he called this project the Summa Theologica, which is to say the sort of the summary of all theological things.
Right. And how big is that work? How big is the Summa?
Hefty. He actually created that one as a teaching tool when he went to teach at a seminary.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost ridiculous now that he opens it by saying, theology gets really hard, so I thought I should do something that's really at an introductory level for beginners. You know what I mean? Giant volume work that he actually never finished by the time he died.
Famous first words, right, as you begin, and then it becomes...
Beginners. I've never felt like such a beginner as when I built in the Summa.
And you also did the thing where you called him Thomas by his first name. So does that happen at some point in your studies where you say, now I'm an expert?
Right. That's right. You get on a first name basis,
Yeah.
You call me Thomas.
Right.
It's considered more appropriate. If you call him Aquinas, everybody knows who you mean. But Aquinas is where he's from. He is Thomas de Aquino. And so to call him Aquinas is really, in a way, you're saying the one from Aquino, which worked. But in terms of sort of identifying him with a proper name, it's Thomas.
All right, I've been enlightened. Let's see if I can get into that. I've been calling him Aquinas, but I'll switch to Thomas.
What do you mean? I don't know what you mean.
Cool. Well, look, man, let's get into the softball easy questions about that people have not been pondering all of existence, right? The easy stuff. So here's the classic question of basically the problem of suffering, and it's basically, how does a good God cause a world that contains evil? And did God cause or create evil in some way? And I've got from the Summa, I've got from Article 2, and it is the question kind of put in Thomas's way, whether the supreme good, God, is the cause of evil. And in the first part, of course, he's walking through the objections as he does, and then I just want to admit my guilt in this, and I did this in seminary too, Tony. I skipped directly to the I answer that part. I know, man. I know. No, I'm sorry, but I do read sometimes, go back to the replies and objections after, but I go immediately to the I answer that part, which I'm going to do now, in which he says basically that, yeah, he says basically God is, basically any agent that creates something, if that agent has any kind of deficiency in themselves or defect in themselves, then you'll find a defect in their action. And so if you consider evil a defect, right, the creator of evil would himself or herself have had a defect in themselves. But he says, of course, this can't be true with God, right, because God is the highest perfection, the most perfect being. And so there was no defect. But he says God created order, and order contains the ability for created things to fail. #fail, get it in there. And then he says, out of that order, there's also justice. So the evil that God causes for Aquinas is the evil of penalty, which is appropriate to, beings that fail, and then there has to be some kind of justice and penalty that comes in. And so in that way, it's God created the conditions for evil. Does that make sense? Is that your understanding too?
Mostly, let's say, yeah. So Aquinas is starting with this understanding of God as pure act,
right,
or full actuality. And for him, what God does when God creates is God creates an image of God's self that is, and you could think of humans obviously in the image of God, but you can think of all of creation for Thomas as the image of God. The difference is it's the image of God that's not pure act. So God, you might say God is God's being fully actualized eternally. Creation is God's being not fully actualized. So God, when God calls the world to being, God says, let something else be. Let there be something. And in a sense, for Thomas, all of creation is the sort of the eternal idea within God's mind that God loves. And God says, let that idea not just be as it eternally is with me, but let it become. Well, what that means is that it becomes in a way that entails potentiality, potency.
right,
So it's not fully actualized.
right.
It doesn't create a sort of mirror image, a clone of God. God creates something that can change and grow. And in that sense, that the limits of creation are what becomes, it sort of becomes the place where the door can open to becoming something other than images of God, if you see what I mean. So he create what the way I would say it is God creates the potential for being to slowly grow into full participation in God.
Yeah. And that the creation of potential, would Thomas see that as a defect or like an opportunity, like you say, for growth into more and more into the likeness of God and into actuality of God and participation in God? I mean, does he create, and this kind of gets into the second question, does he create us imperfect on purpose, or as beings with potential to become perfect? Is that some kind of defect in us? Is that imperfection some kind of flaw? And what does that say about the Creator God, I guess?
Right. No, that's kind of the heart of it, isn't it? The way I understand Thomas, he's making a distinction between limits and potency on one side and defect and suffering and evil on the other. Potency and limit can cross over and become that.
And by their nature are good, probably.
That
I said, and by their nature are good.
So I mean, just you can think of the garden story. That's a story with limit. In that uh, the man that God creates in the garden is lonely because there's something missing. And yet that limit becomes the possibility of something good,
Right.
which partnership, companionship, a relationship. And so, it's important for Thomas that God comes to the end of every one of these days of creation and says that it's good. Everything I've created is good. It's not fully actualized good like it is in God's being, but it's good within creaturely limits. But that becomes the place that those limits can also sort of be exploited and become something else. Because I'm only potentially God's image, I can also remake myself in the image of something else. This is like the hook where evil gets into the story.
Yeah, that makes sense. And talking about the creaturely limits, I mean, you could set that as part of the order of creation itself too, right? About what comes out of the image and likeness of God. It would be order, and it would be those limitations that are placed on the creatures could also be a way of ordering things, which of course is consistent with how Genesis envisions the ordering of creation by days and by limits, like you said too.
So it seems counterintuitive, but what the story seems to be saying is God, who is without limits, says, how will I make a world that is like me? I will make it by separating the day from the night, and separating the dry land from the seas, and the waters above and waters below, and I will name particular creatures within that are the human is the human and not the zebra.
Mm-hmm.
And God is all of these at once, but God is all, God is everything without limit, but somehow these very limits become the good way that God invites creation to become.
Yeah, it's kind of like the I guess just the paradox of an infinite being creating something finite, right? And how that comes to be at all. Oh man, this is deep, good stuff, man. It feels good. This is making my brain happy and tingly and good. So appreciate you, man. Let's keep it going. I got another quote for you, and we're there in the garden. So stay with me there. All right. So I'm headed toward the section on incarnation, and of course Thomas wants to talk about how fitting it is that Christ came. Not that Christ had to come, that there was any obligation separate from God, or compulsion that God had to equation that God had to fix. But it was fitting. It was a good way of achieving the goal of salvation. So he puts incarnation in that context. And along the way, he asked the question, if everything had gone well in the garden, would we even need Jesus to show up later? And so the simple answer that Thomas gives is like, yeah, God could have done that. It would still been cool and fitting, and it still would have worked. There's no, again, there's no requirement that God do or God doesn't do this, right? And so then he goes on to say, in reply, hey, this is in the reply section. There you go, Tony.
Oh, you right on through.
So here's the question: whether if humanity had not sinned, God would have become incarnate. And the opposition in section 1 basically says, if humanity had not sinned, God would not have become incarnate. But Thomas replies, if human beings had not sinned, they would have been endowed with the light of divine wisdom and would have been perfected by God with the righteousness of justice in order to know and carry out everything necessary. That sounds theological, doesn't it? Wow. But because human beings, upon deserting God, fell to the level of bodily things, it was necessary that God should take flesh by means of bodily things and provide them with a remedy of salvation. So basically, yeah, and it sounds like the language of being fitting, right? If we fall to bodily things, then it's fitting that Jesus would come and the Word would be made flesh, and that would be the means to our salvation. And I guess that the question that I have here is, does Thomas see our falling in that story of the garden, our choice to choose something other than God, and kind of live out our limits of freedom and choose defect and other than God. Is that what causes, suffering? And like he says in this, to fall to the level of bodily things. Does that mean suffering enters the world through human sin?
Yeah, this is one of the questions where I think Thomas almost stumps himself. And you can tell it there because usually the way that he starts out in those, like, it might seem this is the case, is the way he starts at every answer.
Right.
Whatever he says is going to be the opposite of that. But this is one where it's almost like by the time he gets through all these really good objections, he's not so sure anymore. So he's like, yeah, I think I've just actually convinced myself.
Right.
It was one of the big questions of Middle Ages, that very question about if we hadn't sinned, would God have become eternal? And so Thomas eventually gets to a no answer, but I always feel like it's a complex no. Like what he's sure about is that, so let's bracket the suffering question for just a moment and sort of expand it to like particular kinds of suffering. What Jesus undergoes on the cross is a particular kind of suffering that we could identify as violence, as an injustice, as the suffering brought on by sort of discernible and nameable and very visible kinds of sin, like people acting through betrayal, people acting out of fear, people acting out of jealousy, and in the midst of all these actions, Jesus ends up nailed, to a cross. Thomas is sure that kind of suffering would not have happened without sin, and that just kind of stands to reason. Like what you're really saying is, if there was no sin in the world, would our sins have brought Jesus to the cross? And Thomas basically says, well, duh, no.
Right.
Easy. What he wants, though, to be sure that we sort of keep in front of us is that God was always going to be present with us in a intentional way, bringing about a kind of let's say for friendship. God was always going to sort of be reaching to us for friendship, for union, for companionship. And my promise is that if we hadn't fallen into sin, then that companionship would have happened through our bodies in particular sorts of ways. Maybe there would have been something sort of, maybe you can look back at sort of God walking with Adam and Eve in the garden and say, well, that was kind of what the incarnation was going to be if there hadn't been sin. It was going to be God showing up in a bodily form and in the cool of the evening and walking with them. So then the question becomes, and then in that sense, maybe there's a kind of suffering there. Maybe there's a kind of suffering that just comes from limit. Maybe getting tired and needing to go to sleep. And noticing what happens with our brains when we're tired. Yeah. Maybe getting tired and lowering our immune systems, so that we get sick. Maybe, gardening, if we're working the garden, we're probably gonna, bloody our fingers if we find on a thorn. So maybe there's a kind of suffering that's just, it goes along with being creatures of limit within a beautiful and good and complex and vibrant relation.
I like that. So suffering not inherently evil in that.
Yeah.
Right.
And then what happens if you put one little twist on it? Mm-hmm. Say, in that kind of environment, what if we start acting out of our own selfish interest? What if we start acting out of fear? What if, we're like Cain and we say, I'm worried there isn't going to be enough blessing for me. I think I'll kill my brother. Well, now you've got suffering that's just giving it one little twist and something violent and hideous has happened.
Right.
I think that's my sense of what's happening here. There's a possibility of it talking about a kind of suffering that coordinates with just being creatures. but then you're really taking it down a level when you're talking about the suffering that coordinates with being sinful creatures.
Yeah, it's interesting. So suffering paired with sin kind of increases the intensity or the potential for more defect, to use the same language that I had.
Right. You can see this when Thomas talks about the reasons for the incarnation that we're bringing up. He'll always say God could have saved us anyway. But God has no limits. God could have done any number of things. But what he loves about the incarnation story is that it is, as he said, fitting, which for him means we can actually name the reasons that this is an appropriate way that God would act. Given that God could have done anything, we can actually name the reasons that it's appropriate that God acted this way. And these two reasons basically coordinate with what I'm talking about. These two reasons are we're bodily creatures, and so it's appropriate that God would come to us in a bodily sort of way, that we can see and hear and taste in the Eucharist, and we can imbibe, God the way that we take in any information. That's for that reason. But then he also says it's fitting because not only are we bodily, but we're sinful. And so the one who came to meet us in the body could also be the one who went to the cross for us, who sacrificed for us. And so the bodily coming of God can also be the kind that undoes sin. And so it's our means for our salvation bodily, and it's our means for our salvation from the sinful thing that's plaguing our existence.
Yeah, I like that, and I want to take that idea of being bodily and that being a good thing, and get to our last question, knowing that you've got a class coming up soon, man. Yeah, so the idea of the body being good, and the idea of the soul and the body being united, even really beyond our earthly life, for me, it brings up the two ways that Thomas says that we can know about God, and one is by human reason, by reasoning that there was a first cause of things and all that, and then just by straight up revelation from the Scripture, and what we just have to take on faith. And I see that at work when he talks about the body being a part of perfection, so that it wouldn't just be that we would be separated from our souls in the end. And for Thomas, perfection is beholding God, the vision of God, the beatific vision, right? Seeing God in God's fullness, as much as we can comprehend that as limited creatures still. But he says in that moment, it would be more perfect for us to still be in body. So seeing with the resurrected body and beholding the vision of God. And so it's just interesting to me, but because he's tied to the revelation of Scripture that says there will be resurrection, right? The doctrine of the resurrection, and that all people will be resurrected. And so it seems to be the reason why he wants to maintain the unity of body, even in the afterlife. So it's interesting to me. And then I got this one quote from here, and he says that the resurrected body and the union of body and soul is a condition, like an outcome of perfect happiness, which I like. And he says it's the result of perfect happiness because there will be an overflow from the happiness of the soul into the body, which I love. Like, right? So like an outpouring of all the goodness that's received within the soul will be a part of the creation of this resurrected body, that this too will attain its perfection. So what do you, is that you consistent with that? You good with that? Am I getting that correct in terms of his commitment to the resurrected body and the unity of body and soul?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important to remember here that Thomas had options before him on how to talk about what heaven is like. What will it be like when we're in God's presence? And the most obvious option is to say this thing that seems to cause us most pain, whether it's the pain we bring on ourselves or it's the pain that we're passive to, seems to be our body. So if we just got rid of that, then maybe we could really just enjoy God without this thing getting in the way.
Yeah, the easy option, right? Yeah.
And for him, it's really like who we are. It's not just, we're not just disembodied souls for him. And you can see this in like for Thomas, a soul is the animating feature of a person.
Anima, right?
Anima, right? It's what makes us move, and what makes us move is not just chemical, It's not just organs, but what makes us move is especially our understanding and in love, our love and our understanding, our desire. He says.
And is that like appetite too?
Yeah. But he means this in a
broader sense. Yeah.
So like if you think about like the grief at a funeral is the grief of seeing what in so many ways looks like the person we miss. But if you brought to that person their favorite things, their favorite book, their favorite work of art, or their favorite, or their people, their grandchildren, like what would be missing is that nothing would move. There'd be no movement of love and no movement of understanding or recognition.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when, like for Thomas, that's when he would say, that's because the soul is not here. The thing that moves this matter isn't here. And for that reason, he says, we can't go the other way either. We can't say, well, then this form that used to be grandpa isn't really grandpa, because it also is. It's what the soul would move. Those are the hands,
Right.
Those are the feet, and those are the facial expressions. And grandpa's both of those. And so for Thomas wants to say, we're both. And this is part of, it goes back maybe to this question about God reaching towards us for friendship. Like that's actually the heart of things for Thomas, is God wants to be with us. God doesn't want to be with sort of the best part of us, but God wants to be with all of us. God wants to be with like the whole CJ, the whole grandpa. And so for Thomas, you can't take that easy option. You can't say, well, then it's a good thing in heaven. I'll just be a soul and no body. So for him, at the resurrection, we are both. We are souls and bodies. And I know we were talking a bit earlier about Plato and Aristotle. What he's doing here is he's really kind of combining them. He's taking the Aristotle, which is to say humans are bodies and souls, but he's also taking the best of Plato, which is to say when we come into presence of higher things, we are transformed in higher ways. Right. So that bit you read is a beautiful example of that. Like when we come into the presence of God, we are so overwhelmed with this knowledge and this love. Our soul is so overwhelmed with the beauty and the rightness and the goodness of God's presence that it changes our body as well. And so this is how he reads what Paul does in 1 Corinthians 15, with the resurrected body being something like our bodies, but it's also something different that we can't recognize. Thomas says, yeah, no, it's still you, it's still CJ, it's still the soul and the body that are together, but the body enjoys the beatific vision, just as, because the soul just overflows with happiness. The body becomes happy too, Nice. And in heaven we're a soul saturated and we're a body that's made happy. Like that's the full us enjoying God's presence.
Would Thomas say that I get my hair back?
Well, that's a puzzler.
Yeah.
Now, can you enjoy when your body is fully enjoying the presence of God, does it mean that the follicles will be reborn and just sort of,
right? Or, it wouldn't be my self-consciousness about not having hair would probably be the thing that would be gone, right?
Yeah. So, you'd be so saturated with the divine fullness that you wouldn't even know if your hair grew back.
Nice. Oh man, so I'm thinking about that moment in the Matrix. I don't know if you remember from the Matrix when he gets first uploaded into like the blank software program, and then he looks at himself, and all of a sudden he like looks the best that he has in a long time, and he's like, "This
Yeah.
is your digital residual self image, like how you would project yourself to look." So maybe it's something like that.
Like that, but it's the idea, it's God's projection. It's sort of, this
Yeah, God's projection back to the image, right?
what God meant by CJ from the very beginning. That's what happens when you're saturated with the divine presence.
I could use a little bit more of that divine knowledge, what God meant by CJ. I'm looking for that.
That's the whole game, right? That's all we're looking for.
No doubt, no doubt. All right, man. Well, I know you got to get to class in a minute, but I just wanted to maybe throw out one more teaser. And I was thinking about this and thinking about how much I miss that good food out there in Austin, Texas. And I wondered if there is, if God could create a breakfast taco that was so delicious that even God couldn't resist it.
Amen. Now, see, that's an Anselmian question there.
Right.
That's maybe even more of a puzzler than the hair is.
All right, I think I might have a way of going at it. All right, so it's a question of omnipotence on both sides, right? Because God has to be able to create the most delicious taco imaginable, but then also has to be able to resist it, right? And so it's a question of basically, if you boil it down, maybe could God create something more powerful than God's self?
Mm-hmm.
Which you could, I guess there's no such possible thing, which gets to Anselm, right? God is that thing beyond which there's no, more powerful thing conceivable.
Anselm says that some of our ways of wording questions about God's omnipotence really come down to ways about asking about God's limit. So if we sort of rephrase the question, what we're really asking is it possible that I sort of lost the hinge with the breakfast taco.
Yeah, I know the breakfast tacos will get you, man. They'll pull you back down to the bodily level. Yeah,
this is what theologians do. We sit around and come up with just ridiculous questions and see if we can stump ourselves.
That's right. And then, so Aquinas also says at some point, I should say Thomas, he says at some point that nothing that implies contradiction threatens the omnipotence of God. And I think that with that case, it has to be both true and not true that God could do what I'm saying. Like it has to be true that God could create the breakfast taco and also true that he couldn't. And so it's contradictory and nonsensical. And so that might be a way of getting out of it too.
I think God is eternally enjoying the ideal breakfast taco.
Oh man, yes, yeah. That's part of that pure potential or pure actuality, right? Actus purus.
Potential of a breakfast taco, but God is enjoying the actuality of it.
Oh man, maybe he'll give us a piece.
One can hope.
Right. All right, brother. It's been good to talk to you, man. I miss you. I hope y'all are well out there. Thank you for all the good work you're doing.
All right, man. Good to be with y'all.
Yeah, we'll talk to you again soon, hopefully, and give our love to everybody out there.
Okay, peace.
Peace.
All right, everybody. Well, that was fun. Thank y'all for hanging in there. I see 670 y'all that have been there for the whole interview, and just I want to say that it was a lot of fun to talk with Tony about breakfast tacos, which I miss immensely, and then also about Thomas's understanding of the nature of God, all the way through the nature of what it means to be a creature and to have limitations. And I guess what I really learned from my discussion with Tony was that Tony can give us a really wonderful, like, big picture because he's studied Thomas so much. He can give us the larger picture of, throughout his work, kind of the themes and the things that Thomas is after. So whereas I don't have the same knowledge and I go to, in particular, answers from questions, like you might answer a question by going, what does the Bible say about sanctification? You might go directly to some text or some verse and look there, but you're not seeing the larger picture of how that verse fits into, the book, or, the rest of the writings of a particular author. And so, yeah, Tony can give us that overview. And so I really appreciate his work, and really had a lot of fun talking to him, as you can see. All right, so I got one question. Oh, okay. I'm going to get to B's comment there that I'm seeing at the end of the thread, and want to challenge that. Why would God want to resist the most delicious breakfast taco, especially if he made it? Yeah, it's a good question. Why would you make it without wanting to immediately eat it? But I guess, if God made it to challenge God's self, to say, could I make something that I couldn't resist? That's the kind of thing it is. And it's another way, B, thanks, of saying that the question is kind of nonsensical, even as it's set up. So I'm going to go back to what Jim said. Could God have created a creator equal to himself? And we kind of got to that question there at the end of the interview when, said, could God make a being more powerful than God's self? And it gets into, kind of the limitations of talking about the infinite nature of God, or talking about, as Tony called Thomas's understanding of God, as pure act, or act without any potential, just kind of act that's fully actualized, and how you think of something being any better than that or equal to that. Yeah, so it's really it's a puzzler, a head scratcher. And then, Tony got to it, and when he said that God created something, with God's being and nature, in the image and likeness, God made creation. And so it's something that is not equal to God in that it has potential, and it's not fully actualized. But could God make something? I guess, if it's not a nonsensical question to ask if he could make something equal to himself, then you'd have to say that omnipotence could. But then it seems like you're headed down. Could that next God create another God and another God? Right? You're headed down a kind of place ad nauseum, ad infinitum, blah blah blah. Yeah. So, but it's a good question. It's a head scratcher, for sure. Kathy, someone to hang out with. Must get lonesome doing it all. Never talks about his immediate family except his son. Couldn't resist. Okay. Who are we talking about there, Kathy? Give me some more enlightenment. Who's not talking about immediate? Anyway, give me some more clarification. All right. So we've got, is this Rick here? The age-old question is, if God is God, then he can create a rock so heavy that he can't lift it. But if he can't lift it, he can't do anything. Right. Yeah. It's another way of framing that question of, could God make a rock so heavy that he couldn't lift it? Right. And again, it's either he can create something that heavy, or he can't lift something that heavy. Right. And so it seems to be, a threat to omnipotence, or a challenge to omnipotence on both sides. So yeah. Let's see. Have I read any Schillebeck? No, I've not. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that. But I'd like to hear more about that, for sure. So yeah, we've talked about Thomas, and we're at the hour mark, and we've had some good questions. Hope you all enjoyed the discussion with Tony. I dropped some links in for Tony's work. One of his books is Diagonal Advance, which is kind of about the same thing we've been talking about our journey to happiness and perfection in God. And then some theology of Shakespeare, which is interesting too. And you will see that on Amazon, it's priced at about a textbook college price. So Tony said he hopes that one day it'll come down, but for now it's there. But just check out that work, take a peek into it, see what Tony's up to. Makes me miss being in seminary and being in Tony's class, listen to him pontificate and annoying with questions about things after the class. All right, let's see. Here we go. B, God is the one who might need to have someone to hang out with. Oh, replying to Jim's question. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, you were replying to Jim. Someone to hang out with. Ah, nice, nice, nice. Now I got you, Kathy. That's funny. All right, yeah. Never talks about anybody except his son. Yeah, well, the interesting thing about the Trinity, right, is that within God's being there is relationship. Yeah, so there's not loneliness, and so the doctrine of the Trinity, if God contains all um, actuality, everything that is infinitely possible, one of those things is to have relationship within God's self, and for there to be no need for loneliness, right? Let's see. Yeah, of course it's Rick. Yeah, yeah, I know. Okay, yeah, God is the one who might need someone to hang out with. Yeah, back to the Trinity. We believe in a God that is within God's being. There is relationship, and I see myself. I'm watching myself on the screen doing. All right, so I think that means it's about time for me to shut it down. But I do appreciate the questions. So next week we will continue, and I believe next week we're headed to the Reformation. And I need to make sure, but I think that we chose. I have to go back and look at my notes. It was between Luther or Calvin, but we'll get the right one, the one that had the most votes from that week, and we'll do either Luther or Calvin in the Reformation next week. So yeah, we'll be talking. I think you'll see, especially Luther uses a lot of Augustine, and Calvin does too, and kind of setting up faith alone being the way that we are justified and sanctified. But I don't want to get too much into it. But I want to say that we'll do one of those next time. And I appreciate y'all being here and hanging with me. And for those that come in later and enjoy the class on your own time, thanks for coming. Leave a comment below, and we'll try to get back to it before next week. Got a lot of things happening in St. Columns. Check out your cantor to see what we're doing, including a backyard Eucharist today at the Gwynns, which we're excited about. Thanks again to Tony Baker, Professor Anthony Baker, Professor of Systematic Theology at the Seminary of the Southwest. Thank you for your time, brother. Enjoyed it, and we'll see you on the flip side of things.